This video will demonstrate the interlayer check capability available in the Constraint Manager. Demonstrated will be how to enable interlayer checks and view interlayer checks. Interlayer checks are available within the Constraint Manager. I'll use the Constraint Manager icon. As we're working with Constraint Manager in any DRC, the first rule is to make sure the DRC mode is enabled. We'll go into Analyze Analysis modes. I need to be in the Design section. I need to expand the General category. Down the bottom, you'll notice a Online Interlayer Checks. We want this enabled so we can see them in real time, so I'll turn that on. We'll do an OK. And let's see what it did to our design. I'm going to do Tools, Update DRC. So let me go into Constraint Manager now, because we can view these DRCs like any other DRC. We'll go to the DRC domain. The interlayer checks are located under the Design folder. Here we can see we have some interlayer spacing DRCs. And just like any other DRC, I can select on one of these and do a right mouse button, select and show element. And there we can see a DRC error like you're used to seeing. Standard show element form with DRCs. And the constraint values and what's going on here, we'll go over what all these mean in just a moment. So within inside the Constraint Manager, we basically have 4 different types of DRCs we can create for interlayer checks. We can create a gap rule, an overlap rule, a layer 1 inside layer 2 rule, and the layer 2 inside layer 1 rule. So to actually start working with the rules, again, now we need to be in the spacing domain. Under the interlayer folder, there is a spacing worksheet. And this is where we will define and look at all our DRCs. A couple of sections we need to look at. First, up top, there's a layer 1 and layer 2 section. We can filter on different things. We can look at geometries, conductors, or vias and pins. Same thing for layer 2. We can filter those out. We'll talk about that a little bit. There's a matrix section. The matrix section is where we'll select the subclass to subclass check. We'll put check marks in one of these. And the bottom section actually where you will define what the rule is going to be and all the values. So let's take a look at one of these rules. Down the bottom here is a gap rule. That is basically making sure there is a clearance between the 2 subclasses. In this instance, we want a 20 mil gap between the bend area and the stiffener. This is used to prevent interference between the flex portions of the circuit to the stiffener. Basically what's going to happen is if the stiffener is too close to a bend, there's a potential for stiffener material to be lifted off the substrate. So we have bend area versus stiffener. We want a rule type of gap. We want 20 mils. It's enabled. The DRC label is here. Basically all DRCs will start with an uppercase I on one side, the left-hand side of the DRC marker. And the right-hand side of the DRC marker, you can define your own label in this column. In this case, it's going to be a S that we'll see in the DRC marker. We can specify which DRC subclass we want that to go. There's a new subclass called _layer. That's where the DRC marker will be displayed. And then we can just type in a description. This is a text field that we can type in. So in this case, again, we want a 20 mil gap between the bend area and the stiffener. So let's see what's happening here. We actually have a violation of this. I'm going to use a visibility file that I have to just zoom in that area. And again, we can remember we wanted a value of 20 between these 2 areas, and we had a gap of 20 with a DRC label S. So if we zoom in a little bit more so we can see this DRC marker, you can see there's an I on the left-hand side, S on the right-hand side. If we hover our mouse over there, you can see that that says there should be a 20 mil gap, and there's actually they're actually touching, so there's a 0 mil gap. So there's a DRC there. So what we can do is the top area here, shape, is a bend area. The bottom area here is the stiffener, and we could basically just go ahead and modify this quickly, make sure the DRC goes away. So I can modify these shapes using the standard shape edit application mode. I'll go into shape edit. I'm going to make sure that this is set to slide, and I'll pick one of these boundaries. That's the rigid flex. I didn't want that one. I'll use the tab. I wanted the flex stiffener flex 1. I'll select that, and I'll just drag this down somewhat. And notice now that that DRC marker has gone away. So the DRCs are real time for the interlayer checks. Next, let's take a look at the inside rule. Remember, there's two of these, one inside 2 and 2 inside 1. The inside rule basically defines that a shape or object on one subclass must be contained within the shape boundary of another subclass. In this case, it's important to note that the cover layer is going to actually be a negative layer. So what that means is any geometry present on that subclass, the cover layer subclass, represents an opening in the actual cover layer material. So basically the cover layer works like a standard solder mask. What we want in this case is we have some gold fingers that are on our design, and we'll make sure that the cover layer doesn't cover the gold fingers. So I'm going to go back to my Constraint Manager, and down the bottom section you'll see there's a 1 inside tool rule and a 2 inside 1. We're interested in the 2 inside 1. So basically layer 2 is the gold layer and 1 is the cover layer. So again, we want a gap between the two of these. So the gold must be within the cover layer and at least by 15 mils inside that area. And again, we'll see a DRC label of G. So again, I have a view file I can use to take a look at this. If we go back to the editor, in this area, we can see that there's our I and G rules. And again, if I look a little bit to the right here, sorry, this is our inside. Remember, layer 2 must be inside by 1, and this must be 15 mils clearance, or gap at least. And you can see over here, let's say, for example, this one is supposed to be 15 mils, but there's only 5 or so mils clearance between that. So we have to do some modification here to get rid of these DRCs. So again, I can just use the shape edit application, which I'm in. I can select on one edge. I'll just drag that up a little bit. Minimize that. I have to go a little bit more to the left here, and a little bit more to the right. So now my gold fingers are now contained inside of this opening of my cover lay and by at least 15 mils. So let's go back to the Constraint Manager. Take a look. We do have an overlap rule down here defined. And again, the overlap rule defines that a shape or object on one subclass must have an overlap with a shape or object on the second subclass. And the overlap value says how much they have to overlap. So we have the bend area and the transition area, and they must overlap by 15 mils. And the DRC label that will be shown will be the letter O on the right-hand side. So let's go over here. And again, I have another view file I can use. So we wanted the transition and the bend area to overlap by at least 15 mils. You can actually see all they do is they just touch. So if I check this DRC, you can see it overlaps by 0. So we're going to modify one of these shapes so that they overlap by at least 15 mils. So let's see, I will try to move the transition zone down. That's the bend area. That's the transition zone. I'll select it, move it down some, and there we go. And now we've moved that rule. Now up to this point, we've kind of looked at this in regards to how you use it with rigid flex designs. We can also use this for standard PCB design. So let's go back to the Constraint Manager. And there's the very top, we have a 1 inside 2 rule from the etch on the internal layer 1, or int 1, next to the design outline. And we want them to be at least 45 mils apart. And if they're not, we'll see the DRC label B. So this might be good in the instance where we have different spacing requirements between the copper and the design outline on different layers. Like maybe the external layers require a different spacing than such as the internal layers. So we can use it in this case. So we want 45 mils between any etch on the int_1 layer away from the design outline by 45 mils. So I'll go back over to here into the design PCB editor area. I'll use yet another view file. And again, you can see there's the I and B. If I move my mouse over it, it says it should be 45. It's only 10 mils away. So you can see how this shape bumps out. I'll have to just basically move that shape back in some. So basically what I'll do is I'll go into shape, edit boundary, select on this shape. Let me zoom in here a little bit more. And I'll start here. And basically what I'll do is I'll just go to the top where this stops and have it cut off there. Oops. You can see now that that DRC marker has gone away. So the interlayer checks can be used in your standard PCB design rules. This concludes the video that demonstrated the interlayer check capability available in the Constraint Manager. This video focused on how to enable interlayer checks and view interlayer checks.